Welcome to Motivated to Lead podcast, helping you become a better leader. I'm your host, Mark Klingstein. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for our podcast this week. My name is Mark Klingstein with SEMA Partners. Each week, we interview leaders and influencers, and they share lessons learned from their careers. This week, we're revisiting a conversation that we had last year with Brian Dumaine. Brian has been an editor at Fortune magazine for the past 3 decades. He's written several books. His last book was entitled Bezonomics: How Amazon is Changing Our Lives and What the World's Best Companies Are Learning from It. Looking forward to our conversation with Brian. We're happy to have with us Brian, and Brian is joining us from the New York area. And I guess first off, Brian, can you give us just a little bit of your background?
I'm a journalist. I've been with Fortune magazine for more than 3 decades. I was international editor for them. I was assistant managing editor for the magazine, and I've covered just about every industry from tech to green energy to the automotive industry to finance and Wall Street. So in a way, when I came across this idea to write a book about Amazon, it was a culmination of all these different areas of business that I'd been covering over the years. And Amazon is such a pervasive type of corporation that I was able to take what I learned covering those different industries and apply them to Amazon to sort of analyze where they are today and where they're going in the future. And that's the essence of my new book, Bezonomics.
Great. Well, tell me a little bit, I think I've heard you say this, that Amazon was kind of built for the times that we're living in, a pandemic, which a lot of companies couldn't say. They've hired a ton of people and definitely just trying to keep up with the demand. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the first quarter, Amazon's sales rose 26%, which is an incredible volume for a company that has revenues of $280 billion. The new Fortune 500 list came out, and Amazon was the second largest company now in the United States after Walmart. However, if you look at Amazon's market capitalization, it's more than 3 times that of Walmart. So you know where Wall Street is betting the future is heading. So yeah, Amazon responded relatively well to the pandemic, given the chaotic nature of what's happened over the past few months. They were able to meet most demand for essential services, although their delivery times really slowed up. And they were moving towards 1-day delivery and sometimes even faster. I have an anecdote in my book about a teen in Seattle who ordered a video game and arrived at his home 8 minutes later. Now, that kind of delivery time obviously was derailed because of the pandemic, and Amazon was averaging about 4 days for essential items and longer for non-essential items. But they're adjusting, and they're adjusting quickly, and that's one of the things Amazon is so good at. It has the data at hand to make adjustments on the fly. And Bezos announced that in the second quarter of this year, Amazon will spend $4 billion, which is at least as much, if not more, as its profits in the second quarter, to further adjust to the new conditions brought by the pandemic. And that includes buying masks for their employees, more hand sanitizers, creating a testing service for their employees. They're going to try to test as many of their employees as possible. And also, and this is what slowed up the deliveries, restructuring the way their fulfillment centers work to try to keep their employees safe. Now, they've been mired in controversy since the pandemic started. There's a small but vocal group of workers who believe that Amazon did not do as much as they could. And, there's evidence that in some warehouses they didn't do as much as they could, perhaps as quickly as they could. But it's a huge system. They have 800,000 employees now, and they hired 175,000 extra employees in a matter of a few months to handle this surge. So, all in all, I'd say they were in the right place at the right time, and they had the tools to adjust to this new reality of more and more people ordering their groceries, their supplies, their cleaning equipment from home.
Great. Well, it's hard to believe Amazon's been around, 26 years, I think now?
Going on 26, right?
Yeah. And I read in your book, you talked about that Jeff Bezos talks about that Amazon, there's that 30-year cycle typically with businesses from the time they start to when they go away, and that they think of things differently than most companies. Talk a little bit about that, just what you learned around that.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. So in my book, Bezonomics, I have an anecdote where Jeff Bezos addressed an all-staff meeting, and he said, Amazon is going to fail. And there sort of gasps in the audience, and how could this company that has a $1.2 trillion market cap, is growing 25% a year, has the world's biggest and most successful cloud computing business in AWS, is challenging Netflix and streaming video, it has its fingers in so many different industries. How could it fail? And what Bezos was talking about was a concept that he's adopted since the first day he started Amazon in 1995, which was the day one concept. Now, what does he mean by that? To Bezos, day one means that workers have to show up at the office, or these days, I guess, on Zoom, with a day one mentality. And that is with the energy, the drive, and the enthusiasm that an entrepreneur has on the first day that they open their business. Now, that's somewhat easy to maintain when you're a small, agile, fast-growing startup. But when you grow into a behemoth like Amazon with $280 billion in sales, 800,000 employees, it's hard to keep that day one spirit going. And that's why Bezos was saying that Amazon could fail, because he believed that if his employees stopped focusing on the customer, which is one of his holy grails, and started focusing more on internal politics or even on the competition, they're going to lose sight of what makes Amazon Amazon. And he said that that's going to lead to a gradual decay in the efficiency and the profitability of the business. And if it continues and everybody loses their day one spirit, day two becomes the death of Amazon. So that's what he meant by that. And, look, I don't think Amazon's going to be dead in 5 years. As you said, it's like 26 years old, and most businesses don't last more than 30 years. I can't imagine it going away in 4 years, but it was a call to arms on the part of Bezos. He really wanted his people not to become complacent, and that's a very tall order in a company as big as Amazon.
Talk a little bit about Jeff Bezos as a leader and just some of the things that you learned. You've covered a lot of leaders over your career at Fortune and have seen a lot of businesses, but talk about a little bit of his leadership style and what you've seen and discovered about him.
Absolutely, Mark. Yeah, in Bezonomics, I spent a lot of the first part of the book trying to understand how Bezos thinks. And one of the things he really prides himself on is resourcefulness. And what he means by that is just sticking at something until you can really figure out how to do it right. And when he was a kid, he spent a lot of time on his grandfather's ranch in Texas. And his grandfather taught him how to be resourceful. They used to build fences, irrigation systems. They built a prefab house. They even rebuilt a Caterpillar tractor on the farm. And Bezos brought that quality with him to Amazon. And, he gives an example of resourcefulness where he was trying to figure out how to allow third-party sellers, these entrepreneurs who want to sell on the Amazon platform, to become part of his business. And he first started with an independent website for third-party sellers where people would bid on products. And that flopped. I mean, no one came. It was sort of like eBay without the sizzle. And then most business people would have given up by then. But Jeff said, well, maybe there's a different way to do it. And he took another approach where the sellers would set their own prices and people could come and have a nice selection of goods. And that totally flopped too. Again, most business people would have walked away and said, like, this isn't working, it's too hard. And then Bezos, with a lot of resistance from his staff, said, we're going to put the goods that these third-party sellers, these entrepreneurs have on Amazon.com, on our very own website. And as people said, that's crazy. We can't control our brand. We don't know what the stuff is and whether it's good quality or whether, people are going to want to buy it. And he said, no, this is the way to do it. And that became Marketplace. And it eventually became a huge success. Now, 58% of everything sold on Amazon is on Marketplace. It's sold by these third-party sellers, and it's the fastest growing element within Amazon's e-tail business. So that was resourcefulness. I mean, he just didn't give up. I mean, he does know when to give up if it's a huge flop, and like with the Amazon Fire phone, he thought he could make a phone that would compete with the iPhone and the Android phones, and he launched it, and the market just said, no, we don't want this. It's a mediocre phone at a high price. Forget about it. And he was smart enough at that point to cut his losses. But he did take a lot of the technology from the Fire phone and he applied it to Alexa and the Echo devices, the smart speakers that Amazon now dominates in the market with. And so in a sense, he was resourceful in that way too. He took a failure and he took the learning from the failure and he was able to apply it to a new product line, which is the Alexa Echo smart speakers. And, one of my favorite anecdotes I have in the book is that when Bezos was looking for a wife, he was a young guy working Wall Street in New York City. He said he was looking for a resourceful woman who would know how to get him out of a third world prison.
That's great. How the whole company has definitely impacted. I was, my grandson, who was 4 at the time, walked into a room at my one of my other daughter's homes, and he saw a speaker sitting on the counter, and he asked the question, "What is her name?" And I knew that Amazon had taken over, that he was used to Alexa being called. He thought everything had a name. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, there's this new generation coming up will be in a world where the main way they'll communicate with the internet is through voice. I mean, this is a radical revolution ongoing. And, typing at some point, except for perhaps, writing books, is going to become obsolete. We're going to be mostly communicating. That's a deliberate strategy on the part of Jeff Bezos. I mean, he's creating this Amazon ecosystem, which is meant to touch every aspect of our lives. So when you have Alexa in your home, you can use Alexa to stream movies on your television or listen to music on your Amazon Echo speakers. You can use Alexa to turn your home security systems on and off, to see who's ringing your smart doorbell. If you're in your car and you're driving home, you can use Alexa to order something from Whole Foods and drive by, pop your trunk open and have those groceries put in the trunk of your car. So Alexa is sort of a Trojan horse where Amazon can enter your home and create this ecosystem and eventually use Alexa for shopping as well at home. I mean, a lot of people have a hard time using voice for shopping because, what do you do? Say, I want some ketchup? Well, Yeah, but what kind of ketchup? Do you want like Heinz? Do you want the big bottle? Do you want the small? But what Amazon has in mind is for Alexa to eventually control the shopping list. So it'll know when you say, I want ketchup, it'll know exactly that you want a 18-ounce bottle of Heinz ketchup. And with the Echo Show, which is Alexa with a smart screen, you can actually see what it is you'll be ordering. And so you can imagine buying clothes on, I want to buy a new polo shirt, and I ask Alexa, I'd like a new polo shirt, and pictures of polo shirts will pop up on the screen. We'll know what I bought the last time, but might suggest some new models I'd want. So, I mean, I think we're seeing just the beginning of Amazon's domination of this electronic ecosystem, which will, depending on your point of view, enhance your life or scare the hell out of you.
Right. So on the other side of things, we've got people that are working with Amazon as third-party resellers that I think you've mentioned that, there's people that find that that's not always an easy thing to do, to work with Amazon, but it's also given them access to their audience or their customer base. Talk a little bit about that and what you see, how companies are going to be working with them, and also on the competitive side of things, how are companies going to be able to compete against a company like Amazon?
Sure, absolutely, Mark. The world of third-party sellers is both rewarding and difficult for the entrepreneurs trying to sell on the Amazon platform. Part of the reason is there's so much competition. You're not only competing with Amazon, you're also competing with the 2 to 3 million other entrepreneurs trying to sell on Amazon. And the reason there's so many people trying to sell on Amazon is because that's where the people are. Amazon now has 150 million Prime members around the world, and for the most part, they're very affluent shoppers. They're Amazon's most affluent shoppers. They spend a multiple of what people who aren't Prime members spend on Amazon. So entrepreneurs are trying to reach them. I have a story in my book about an entrepreneur in London who sold these little luggage compartments that fit into your suitcase when you're traveling. Remember those days when we used to travel? And the idea was that it allowed you to more efficiently pack your suitcases. And he was doing just fine. He was selling his product for about $30 each, and he was making a nice living doing it. One day he woke up and he found that Amazon had a similar product, and it was selling it for $20. So he had to scramble, and he had to figure out ways to lower his price, which he did. But in order to make it profitable at that lower price, he had to scale up his business. And to scale it up, he needed capital. And one day on his Amazon control board, every entrepreneur selling on Amazon has a little control board that allows you to manage your business on Amazon. A little, button popped up saying, "Would you like to borrow some money?" And that was from Amazon. Amazon offered to lend this entrepreneur $300,000. So he had a nice line of credit. He borrowed the money. And right before the busy holiday season, that same algorithm that popped up on his screen and said, "Would you like to borrow $300,000? suddenly said, "You can't have the $300,000 anymore. You have to pay it back." And he had no idea why, some black box algorithm making a decision somewhere. So he nearly went out of business. He had to scramble and borrow money from another third-party seller, a friend of his. And so it was a happy story. He survived, and he was doing quite well up until the pandemic. And then he had to obviously shift because of the travel industry being so badly hurt. But that wasn't his only challenge. I mean, he also had to deal with unscrupulous sellers on the website. One day, he woke up and he found that a Chinese seller had hijacked his Amazon page, and they had taken out his product and put their own in and their own product description. And he said, but they weren't doing it to steal his sales. They're doing it to steal his data on, what search words he was buying. In the Amazon, you have to bid for the best search words so people can find your product. If you don't end up on the first page of Amazon, forget about it. You might as well not exist. So he had to deal with that. And, I came across in my book, Bezonomics, so many other stories of entrepreneurs who were hit by unscrupulous other sellers on the site. One of my favorite stories was there was an entrepreneur who was selling garden hose nozzles, and he had a good business, and he had 500 positive reviews on Amazon. And one day he woke up and he found that someone had hijacked his site and had replaced the photos and the description of the garden hose nozzles with HD TV antennas. And he couldn't figure out what was going on. And then it dawned on him that the seller of the HD antennas wanted those 500 positive reviews, even though they're about garden hose nozzles. And what happens in the world of Amazon is so many buyers, looking for an HD antenna will just see those 500 positive reviews and they won't read them. They won't realize they're about garden hoses and not HD antennas, and they'll buy that HD antenna, right? So, you complain to Amazon, and the problem with some buyers, especially if they're foreign buyers, is they'll say, like, I'm not going to stop doing this. Good luck, come and sue me in whatever country they're operating out of. So it's a really, really tough business selling on Amazon, both because, as I've said, you compete with Amazon and with these other third-party sellers, but it's also an incredibly lucrative market because they have an amazing collection of customers. So I call the chapter that I write about this "Dancing with the Devil." In other words, you can't ignore Amazon, but it's really hard living with it.
So as a leader of companies, organizations, what should people be learning from Amazon as far as in how to kind of navigate this new world?
Yeah, Mark, that's a great question. And I think if you understand how Bezos built Amazon, I think you can apply many of those lessons to your own business. And he has these three tenets, and they're customer obsession, extreme innovation, and long-term thinking. Now, most good leaders will say they believe in all of those things, but Bezos really believes in those things, and he acts on them in almost a fanatical way. And the way he instills those principles in the organization is by a creation of this organizational notion called a flywheel. It's almost a tool. It's a frame of mind, right, to run an organization. And what the flywheel represents is a way to not only think about something, but to focus all your people on these three tenets: customer obsession, extreme innovation, and long-term thinking. And to help you explain a little bit about how this works, you have to go back to a time not too much unlike our current time. It's 2001. The dot-com stock bubble had just burst. Amazon stock had dropped from $107 a share to $6 a share. Barron's had written a story, and its title was Amazon.bomb. One analyst on Wall Street said that Amazon was going to run out of cash by the end of the year. So Bezos was in a quandary, maybe even a death spiral, and then 9/11 hit, and the economy slowed down even more. So he turned to a management consultant, Jim Collins. Most of your audience probably knows about Jim. He wrote Good to Great. He's one of the best management thinkers in the world, in my opinion. And Bezos called Collins up to Seattle and to meet with him and his board. And Collins told him, he said, in a time of crisis, you're not supposed to react to bad news, but instead focus on a flywheel. And Collins says that Bezos was probably always a flywheel thinker, but Collins gave him the language to make it clear to both Bezos and to people in his organization, how to really optimize on this concept. And Bezos at that meeting took a piece of paper and he sketched a flywheel. And what it is it starts with customer. Remember, one of his tenets is customer obsession. The idea is you do everything for the customer. That's why, in the early days of Amazon, it didn't have, fancy cafeterias like Google or Facebook. Bezos even used doors as desktops. So every penny went to making the customers' purchases cheaper and the customers' deliveries faster. And the more you do for the customer, the more customers you attract. The more customers you attract, the more third-party sellers you attract on your website because they want to reach those customers. The more third-party sellers you attract, you get more economies of scale, bigger revenues, more economies of scale, which allows you in turn to lower prices for your customers or improve service, improve delivery. And this is a virtual cycle. And this is the flywheel that got Bezos out of that hole in 2001. Now, he still uses the flywheel today. I mean, in my book research, I came across a posting on an Amazon blog saying anyone applying for a job here should understand how a flywheel works because we're going to ask you about it in your interview. And I interviewed about a dozen or so executives at Amazon, and many of them talked about the flywheel and how important that was. What's new about the flywheel? Because, other companies since 2001 obviously have used the flywheel. What's new about it is that Bezos has now applied big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning to his flywheel. So in a sense, the flywheel keeps moving faster and faster, but it's being driven by algorithms that are getting smarter and smarter on their own. I mean, that's what AI is. It's like machines that learn and get better at what they do. So in its e-commerce business, for example, Amazon used to have these meetings with their top 60 managers once a week, sort of like the Saturday morning meetings that Walmart used to have to sort of figure out where they are and where they're going. And over the years, this Jeff Wilke, who's head of global operations for Amazon, he's the number 2 in the company. And a lot of people think he would be just a replacement if Jeff ever stepped down. He has ingrained their business with artificial intelligence. It's not that, we have this project, let's call in the data scientists and let's try to tag some artificial intelligence onto what we're doing. It's the DNA of how they're selling now. So a lot of the decisions that human beings used to make at that meeting with the 60 Amazon executives are now being made by algorithms in terms of how many items to buy, what colors, what sizes, where to stock them, when to stock them. And that's one of the reasons, going back to one of your earlier questions, that Amazon was able to respond to the surge in demand in the pandemic as well as it could, because the machines were sorting the data coming in, seeing where the surge in demand was coming from, and it was able to respond more quickly than human beings could.
Hmm. So I read your book, and it's a great read, and you definitely make it entertaining as well as informative, and definitely encourage everybody to get out and purchase a copy. And I'm sure you can find it on Amazon as and,
absolutely.
Yeah. But tell us a little bit more how people can find out about your work and some other things that you've done.
Sure, Mark. I've got a website called Bezonomics.com, and you can find out about some of my work, some of my speaking engagements in the future, and you can also buy my book from some other sources other than Amazon. One of the links is to a site that where you can order the book from small independent bookstores, which I think is really important to do in this time with so many of them closed and struggling to survive. It might take you a bit longer to get the book than from Amazon, but there are options to buying the book out there. And it's Bezonomics.com.
Great. Well, thanks, Brian. This has been a lot of fun, and appreciate your insights, and wish you continued success.
Thanks so much, Mark. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Motivated to Lead podcast. Please subscribe on iTunes. You can also see a video version of this interview at motivatedtolead.com. This podcast is brought to you by SEMA Partners, helping you find your next great leader.